thought you were wrong. I never hesitated to tell you that, well, that other people were trying to manipulate, whatever. But I said, whatever you do, and we were still in the process of trying to find someone to take my place. I said, whatever you do, don't hire a yes man, someone that's going to tell you, or it won't tell you the truth. Don't do that. Because if you do, I believe you'll be impeached.
Now, keep in mind for a moment, John Kelly is a retired four-star general in the United States Marine Corps. After Donald Trump heard that quote from Kelly this weekend, he fired back, quote, John Kelly never said that. He never said anything like that. If he would have said that, I would have thrown him out of the office. But it was Trump's press secretary's quote that may get her considered for nomination to the Supplicant Hall of Fame. Stephanie Grisham said this, quote, I worked with John Kelly, and he was totally unequipped to handle the genius of our great president. Still with us tonight, Mimi Rocah and Tim O'Brien. Tim, is that the guardrail theory of Donald Trump, and does it require self-knowledge to not hire a yes person to be next to you?
You know, the thing is, the statement from John Kelly actually shows how little he understands Trump, because it doesn't matter in the White House or around Trump if you're a yes man or a yes woman or a no man or a no woman. Trump doesn't take advice from anybody. At the end of the day, one of the reasons he's a dangerous executive is because he's ungovernable, and he's ungovernable because he doesn't listen to anyone else. So I think that's the first problem. The second problem is, remember Kelly's own tenure. A week after he got the job, he was sitting next to Trump at Bedminster when Trump said he was going to unleash fire and fury on North Korea. And Kelly had to sit there stone-faced. It was during Kelly's tenure as chief of staff that the president routinely obstructed justice that was documented fully by Bob Mueller. So he clearly didn't rein in the president from being outlandish publicly or from engaging in impeachable acts as president. So I just think it's a fallacy to think that anyone can be put around him who can actually regulate him. At the end of the day, the people he keeps around are the people like Stephanie Grisham, who have this sort of Maoist approach and will just write peons to the great leader and not actually challenge him on strategy or policy or anything else. And any good adult, any competent adult running an organization, whether it's a business or the government, is someone who takes advice from other people, consults other people, understands they don't have all the answers. That has never been Donald Trump. It's why he didn't have a successful business, and it's why he has had a haphazard presidency. He runs a cult of personality. He doesn't really manage an organization.
Mimi Rocah, are we 3 days away from reading that Rudolph Giuliani was my attorney for a very short period of time? And there's another way of asking a question I like to ask of you every week. How much legal jeopardy does Rudy face right now tonight?
And shockingly, his legal jeopardy keeps growing every week. So we should keep asking that question. Look, I think that Giuliani is, I don't like to predict indictments, but right. All arrows point that way with Giuliani in the Southern District of New York. They've talked about, this mountain of evidence that they have on his... It
would indicate electronic.
They have specifically mentioned some kind of electronic surveillance. I'm not saying they had a wiretap on Giuliani, but it very well could be that he was intercepted in some way. It sounds like they have some cooperators. I think, we're going to find that out. And remember, Giuliani, had this voicemail that he left for a reporter, and in an unguarded moment when he didn't know people were listening. So it's like our own wiretap on Giuliani. He said to whoever he was talking to, we had to force them to do it, talking about Ukraine investigating the Bidens and all these things that we're all debating. I mean, he admitted that's it. I know Mulvaney admitted it also in a different way, but this is Giuliani when he didn't know, he wasn't trying to rationalize it and say it's okay. He was really giving up the game there. So I think he is, yes, in serious trouble.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.